Hello everyone. Are you ready to talk about techniques for better forecasting in Excel? So here goes. So this is me. My name's Danielle Stein-Fairhurst. I am a financial modeling specialist, and using Excel for the purpose of financial modeling is pretty much all I've ever done. It's my world. It's what I live and breathe. I've written a couple of books about financial modeling, and fairly recently I became a Microsoft MVP. So a lot of the forecasting that I do is in the context of financial modeling, and so I'm going to kind of come at this at this topic from that perspective. But before I jump into the technical side of Excel and forecasting in Excel, I'd just like to sort of set a bit of a backstory about budgeting versus forecasting, because a lot of what I do is budgeting. So I just wanted to talk about the differences between budgeting and forecasting. So budgeting is set for a 12-month period according to the strategic plan. So a budget is generally this enormous project, and it's very, very slow and detailed model if you're building it in Excel. A forecast, however, is updated continually, and it's about reflecting changes that are based on the latest information. A budget is generally static. The budget is the budget is the budget, and the budget doesn't change. Whereas a forecast is flexible and it's updated frequently. A budget is usually less accurate because we set the budget up months and months and months in advance, whereas the forecast is quite quick. And it should reflect a more accurate picture. So what we're talking about today is that forecasting side of things, when you're taking the actuals, perhaps comparing them to the budget, and actually getting into the technical side of using Excel to create forecasts for your organization, because Excel is the perfect tool to create forecasting. Now, I know there's lots of other pieces of software that will do it for you, but I'm going to show you a couple of really, really simple techniques, fairly reasonably simple techniques that you can apply in your organization just using standard Excel. So this is what I would like to take you through today. So there's four main areas that I'd like to cover with you. Firstly, we'll talk about some Excel forecasting tools, just some of the tools that are right there straight out of the box, Excel as we know and love it. We'll then jump into a bit of the theory about regression, linear regression, because a lot of what we're doing is about linear, straight line. We'll look at calculating seasonality, because there's Excel will do it for us, or we'll have a look at how to do that manually, and then we'll have a look at some rolling forecasts, which are quite fun. So the first thing we'll do is talk about I know that there's more than 500 different functions in Excel. I'm just going to pick out a couple that you're going to find really useful for forecasting in Excel. So firstly, the one that you're absolutely going to find the most useful is the forecast function, or the trend function will pretty much, for our purposes, is going to do pretty much the same thing. That is the forecast function. I like to use forecast because that's what we're doing is forecasting. It is now called the forecast.linear because that's what it is. It's actually forecasting in a linear line. Now the forecast function will still work, but it's eventually going to be deprecated. So what I would recommend is that you start getting used to using the forecast.linear function instead. The other thing I'd like to take you through is having a look at the forecast.ets. So that stands for exponential triple smoothing, and that takes into account the seasonality of the data that we are given, or that we give to the formula. And then lastly, we'll take a look at the forecast sheet, which is a really quick and easy way of putting together some forecasts in Excel. So before we do that, though, of course, we just need to go into some of the background into what linear regression is. So in order to use the forecast.linear function, we need to understand basically how it works. So just remembering back to maths class, Do you remember this stuff? Do you remember a chart that looked something like that? So regression analysis, it tries to find that mathematical relationship between the x-axis and the y-axis in the form of a straight line. Do you remember the line of best fit? And then we can use it. So what the forecast.linear function will do is use that relationship to forecast out into the future. So if you can recall this function, y equals mx plus c, so y being m being the slope of the curve, and you can use that to calculate what that will be going forward. And you can even when you use a trend line in Excel, you can even add that onto the chart if you are so inclined. So let's jump into Excel now and take a look at how to use this for calculation. Now, if I jump over into Excel, you can see I've got some historical data that looks like that. Of course, it's always going to be much nicer if you can look at it visually, and you can see there that's what my data looks like. And of course, it's going to look much nicer if I were to change the colors. Maybe make it look something like that. Probably don't need that title, get rid of that. And I can click on the line like that and right click and say add trend line, or I can go to here and say trend line like that. So now if I go into the options of that trend line, in here you can say display equation on the chart. So that's how you can add that onto there. Now, use Excel's pretty clever. If I were to grab some data like that and just copy it down, there we go, done. We can all go home, easy. That's not really a great way of doing it from an audit perspective. That would be a nightmare, trying to figure out what was a hard-coded number and what was a forecast, because it really doesn't tell you. So I'm not going to recommend that you do that, although we will end up with almost exactly the same numbers. So I'm going to use the forecast.linear formula. So you can either type it straight out, or you can jump in and use the dialog box. So what it's asking us for here is X. So that's the point on the X-axis for which we want to forecast. So in this case, it's going to be July 21, because that's the point on the X-axis out into the future that we want to forecast for. So that is the X that we are solving for. The known Y's is the historical like that. Use your F4 shortcut to fix your references, and then the corresponding known X's are going to be the corresponding points on the X-axis, and we'll say OK, and we should be able to drag that down, and that's going to give us a line directly along the trend line. And if I were to just link it through like that, that will sort of give us a really nice looking linear trend. One thing though, with when it's something like sales, you would expect that your sales generally is going up, but what if it wasn't? What if we were to have some data that looked like that, and we say minus 75, and there we go, oh my goodness, and it all just goes down, and you can see that the forecast is going less than zero, which absolutely does not make sense. So quite often we just need to consider that with the forecast. So you could say, if the formula is less than zero, give me zero, otherwise give me the formula, which will end up being quite a long formula. An easier, much simpler way to do that would be to use a max and say the maximum value between the formula and zero, and that will make it bottom out when it gets to the zero. So that's just a quick introduction to linear regression and linear forecasting. So what I'd like to talk to you about next is some seasonality. A lot of industries have seasonality, and this is where it really depends on the product, and it depends on the data that you've got, or the particular product or industry that you're in. Some industries are really seasonal, and you need to take that into account. Some are not at all. So let's have a look at a couple of ways that we can apply seasonality to our forecast, or at least calculate what they are. So just jumping back into Excel. So the data that I've got set up like this, you can see I've actually set it up in quarters. Now, the The reason that it's set up like that is so that we can look at each quarter individually. So what we want to do here is look at the average of each quarter individually. So you can see by doing it like that quarter one is quite low, quarter two is higher, quarter three is the highest, and it goes back down again in quarter four. So it gives you a bit of an idea of what the seasonality is going to look like. So I could use an average formula like that, F4, and that tells me that the average of everything is 725. So I can use that number here. So I can take that 587 and divide it by the average of the entire data set and work out my seasonality there. So what that's saying is that the seasonality or the seasonality index of quarter one is 0.81. So 1 being average or 100%, 0.81 means that it's lower than average. So I can copy that across like that. And so that is the seasonality index for every quarter. So what I'm going to do now is use that seasonality index in my forecast, but I need to kind of set my data up a little bit better than the way I've got it. So my start date there is 31st of March, and I need to just kind of recut it. So I'm going to start with the 31st of March, and I'm going to put my data into one column because I need to do that in order to calculate the linear forecast. So I could use an E date, or there's a couple of different functions I could use here. I'm going to go with an EO month. So that's my start date there, and I'm going to say 3 months from that date and copy that down. So my data goes to the end of 2022. And then I want to go out for another 4 periods after that. Okay, so that's as far as I want to go. So what I need to do now is to take this data here and just flick it around. So you could just copy and, you could do your paste special and transpose, but of course it would be nice to leave it linked. We could just use an array like that. Now I'm using Excel 365, so you can see it's actually picked it up as a dynamic array. If you are not using 365, it will not work like that. What you'll need to do is highlight the whole lot and then go Control Shift Enter, and that will create the dynamic formula for you. You can see that it's actually put those curly brackets around it. I'm going to leave mine as is because I'm using Excel 365, so I just need to do another transpose for the second year like that. There's no kind of quick and easy way to do this, unfortunately. So then I use my third transpose across like that. There we go. All right. So that's my data recut into one column. And then what I can do is, just like we did last time, is use my forecast.linear to forecast it out. Actually, before I do that, I'll just go in and create my chart. There we go. That's a good start. Okay, change my colors. We'll go back to that one. All right. Okay, so then I'll go back and do my forecast.linear formula. So X, again, is the point on the X-axis that I want to forecast for. The known Y's is the historical data, F4, and the known X's are the corresponding dates, F4. There we go. And I should be able to copy it down. Aha, and you can see there, I'll just link that up at the top. You can see it's it's gone straight along the trend line, or the line of best fit. Just go and change my title here. Seasonalized forecast, we'll call it. Okay, so now what I want to do is actually grab my seasonality index. I'm going to do another transpose, and there we go. Just flick it down like that. I don't want that showing up on my graph. I don't need that there. Get rid of it. Okay, and then I can just take that number and multiply it out. There we go. And so that is going to give us a nice little forecast. So it's taking the forecast that we did and then applying the seasonality to it. Okay, so that was seasonality. We might come back to that, because what I want to do next is to take a look at the next thing on that list, which was the forecast sheet. Let's take a look at that now. So So with Forecast Sheet, you just grab some data like that, go to the Data tab and Forecast Sheet. And you can have a look at some of the options there. If we leave everything as it was and say create, there we go. That will very, very quickly create a forecast very similar to what we just did, except that it's going to actually give us the upper and lower bounds of our confidence interval. So that is a really, really quick way of creating what we just did there. So what I could do is in fact have done it. So instead of going through all of these steps that I just did here, I could just grab my data and say Forecast Sheet. There we go, and create. And that will create it very, very quickly and easily. So why do I not just do that? Why do I go through each of those? Yeah, you can totally do it like that or like that, and that's absolutely fine. Personally, I think it's easier to explain if you calculate the seasonality index manually. And I think that trying to explain how this has been calculated perhaps is a little more difficult. We tend not to use a lot of tables in financial models, so that automatically creates a table. So if I am going to use the forecast.ets, I often, instead of using the forecast sheet, I actually include that in my model as the formula. So let's have a look. That's what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing, and I'm going to use the forecast.ets formula. So the target date, in fact, I can probably even just grab this one here. If I were to fix my reference there and copy that across, I can actually change that from forecast.linear to forecast.ets. There we go. So the forecast.ets, the seasonality, you can put that as 1, or in fact you can just leave it blank. We'll pretty much do the same thing. There we go. And that will give you almost the same as it did when we calculated it manually. It does just use a slightly different method. So you could, I do quite like the forecast.ets, or you can do it manually. So a couple of options there for you. Let's have another look at a different example. So here we've got a whole lot of data. It's like 486 rows here. We've got our dates all over the place and our order quantity. Again, if I hit Control A and just go in and create a chart, in fact, if I go to recommended charts, gives me a bit of an idea of what the data looks like. You could look at it like that, or you could look at it like that. Let's see what that looks like. Okay. Yeah, that's wow, it's that's pretty wild looking data. So you can see that it's automatically sorted it, which is great. But if I want to do some forecasting here, you can see it's actually been sorted in order quantity from largest to smallest. I'm actually going to change the sort order, and I'm going to change it by the date. From the oldest to newest. Okay, there we go. All right, that hasn't changed my chart, which is fine. Just make that a little bit bigger. I don't need to see the first there. That's entirely unnecessary. So I can go into Format Axis. I can go to the number, and I can just go in and get rid of the day, add. There we go. All right, that looks a little bit better. And again, I can change my colors. There we go. All right. So then once I'm happy with that, I can go in again, and you could just go with your forecast linear, exactly like we did before. Known Ys, known X's. There we go. And so that is giving me my forecast. So let's have a look at how, okay. And we often see this with data that varies a lot. We get what we call the swordfish, which is perhaps yeah, not particularly helpful. But because the data is just so varied, that's really all we can do with that one. So instead, I could try, let's have a look at what Forecast Sheet has got to say about that. So let's go in and have a look at, wow, okay, all right. So you can see there that because the data changes so much, and I've used a 95% confidence interval, you can see that the forecast is going to be quite a wide range if I want to be 95% confident that my data is correct. So if I were to reduce that perhaps to 80, would you reduce a little bit, or maybe to 50, something like that. And you can play around with those numbers just a little bit perhaps. Okay, so there you go, there's another way to do it. And the last thing I would like to talk to you about today is rolling forecasts. So rolling forecasts are a great way of taking a look at what the future is going to look like. So as our actuals roll in, we are constantly going to be looking out for a 12-month period. So your data or your forecast is going to look something like this. So as you change the actuals, or as you add your actuals in, your forecast is going to roll forward for a 12-month period. So let's have a look at how to build something like this in Excel. So we've got the data set up for you. So that's your budget model, that's your actuals, and you'll notice I've actually set up some little formulas here, actual budget with our assumptions. So that's just based on the start date there. That's already set up for you. I've also used the old 1 and 0 flags. So that is a technique we use a lot of in financial modeling. So what that does there is says if it's the budget, give me a 1, otherwise a 0, and then we're going to use that to include in our rolling forecast. So what we've got here is our actual and our budget. So here I'm going to calculate my 12-month rolling forecast. So let's have a go at using the forecast.ets for a change. So we'll say that's my date there. The dollar signs are going to be really important here. So that's my target date. So the values, now I'm going to just go out for two months. So I'm going to fix my dollar sign against the E, and I need to take it away from the F. There we go. And the timeline, again, the dollar signs are going to be quite important. So the E, I need to put both dollar signs against the E, and the dollar sign needs to go on the 2 because I need to fix that. I'm not going to worry about the seasonality. So if I've got my dollar signs right, let me just check that. Okay, yep, that's looking good. So I should be able to copy it all the way over. So I'm going to go out for around 2 years all the way across. There we go. Okay, so that is our forecast. Now I've set up some charts here, and you can see that the whole thing goes out for the 2 years. Now I only want it to go out for the 12-month period, so I'm going to edit that formula. Now you can see here, remember we talked about that negative? So that's happened here. It doesn't make sense for my forecast to go into a 0. So I'm going to go in and put a max around it, and we'll just say comma 0 at the end. There we go. So that has stopped that 0 from happening. And then the last thing we're going to do is to just multiply it by the flag across the top. And again, get your dollar signs right. Control Shift right arrow, Control Shift down, Enter. There we go. So that is only forecasting for that period. In fact, if I were to grab this current month here and just paste it in there, you can see that if I were to change this, it will just automatically change and roll it backwards and forwards as I change the numbers like that. And then the last thing I'll do here is to just create a spark line, which is always nice to pop a spark line in there. There we go. That looks quite nice. All right. Just change the color. There we go. So there's our rolling forecast. Okay, and that brings us to the end of our session. So today, I know it's been a very quick overview, but we had a look at some of the forecasting tools that you can use in Excel. We had a look at linear regression. We looked at a couple of different options for calculating seasonality, and then lastly, some rolling forecasts. So I hope that's given you a bit of an idea of what a fantastic tool Excel is for creating seasonality. So I would love to see you again. I run lots and lots of virtual meetups relating to Excel and modeling. I'd love to see you here. Here are some of the topics that we've got coming up over the next couple of weeks. So that is the link to sign up. So my name is Danielle Stein Fairhurst, and I'd love to see you again soon. Thank you.